Okay, it's 3:30, so we'll go ahead and get started now. So I will pass it over to you guys over in Hastings.
All righty, thank you very much, Olivia. Welcome to the February SLPS presentation, hosted this month by Hastings College. My name is Jim Dugan, Professor of Physics here at Hastings. Our speaker today is our own Jeff Berggren. Jeff graduated from Hastings in 2010 with his bachelor's in biology. He then completed an MBA with an emphasis in his primary area of interest, renewable energy. Jeff has worked in the renewable energy field since 2007, when he founded Husker Wind Power. With an extensive background in construction and agriculture, Jeff has managed multi-million-dollar energy-efficient projects throughout Nebraska. Jeff currently is the program manager for GenPro Energy Solutions, a company dealing with renewables, in particular solar energy. With that emphasis in mind, Jeff will be talking about solar applications for communities. The title of his talk today is Solar Solutions for Communities. Our speaker today, Jeff Berggren.
Hi everyone, happy to be here. Going to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Nebraska in the last year. It's been exponential growth, to say the least. We've installed more solar in the last 3 months than we did in the last 9 years in the state. So it's really coming on strong, and we expect 2017 to be even better. My presentation is probably going to be about 30 to 35 minutes with plenty of times for questions. If there's any other type of solar you'd like to talk about, residential, commercial, or anything solar related, I'll be happy to answer any of those questions. But today we're going to focus on what the communities throughout Nebraska have been doing. I'm with GenPro Energy Solutions. I just wanted to mention they've been in business for 13 years. That's quite a long time for the solar industry. We're kind of the old men. This is my 10th year in the business. GenPro was my distributor for all my products when I owned my own company for 9 years. We have an office down in Florida. We also have a new office in Central City that I just opened on Monday. Just to brag a little bit, GenPro Energy Solutions is a top 500 commercial contractor, solar contractor in the United States, 141 in 2016. In 2017, we should break the top 100. The NABCEP certification you see there on the right is a very difficult certification to get. There's only 2 in Nebraska and only 2 in South Dakota, and for a long time we were the only ones. This allows us to work directly with municipalities, any form of federal government, and the military. And we do a lot of work with the Air Force up in South Dakota. And also we maintain our A+ Better Business Bureau. I got into solar 10 years ago thanks to an internship that was provided to me from Hastings College, where I went to Alaska and got to remote monitor stellar sea lions. And these remote monitoring stations were solar powered and mini wind turbine powered, and I got to work on those. And I saw the ability to exist in that environment in the middle of the Alaskan Ocean. If it can work there, I knew it could work in Nebraska. But I was also pretty environmentally concerned and then socially concerned. My biology degree here at Hastings College, and during that time I did a lot of ecology. I was really interested in the environment, ecology, and what was going on, and what's the best way that I could help out. So those are my reasons. But as I said, I've installed in the last 3 months, we've installed more solar than I did in the last 9 years in Nebraska. And that's because here in Nebraska, it needed to be make economic sense. For years, the utility companies wouldn't do our projects. They wouldn't return our phone calls just because everybody was under the impression it was way too expensive. The returns of investment weren't good enough. Everybody cared about the economic paybacks, which in Nebraska, farm-based, ag-based economy, that's kind of the conservative values throughout the state. When that started making sense about 2.5 years ago, we really started getting approached with communities, which kind of surprised us. They wanted to do large-scale projects to benefit their whole community and not just people putting solar on their roof here and there, only the people that could afford it. They really wanted to spread the benefits throughout their entire community. The solar also adds to the resource efficiency for them, the energy efficiency of their whole system. but we still had to have that total shareholder return. And in this case, the shareholder that we were having trouble getting its return were the utilities. The utilities didn't have any real incentives to do any of this. That's changed now, and I'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. Last and not least, these projects have been helping the local economies. We normally have a team of two teams of 6 people each running throughout Nebraska. We also hire a lot of temporary work because when you're installing 12,000 solar panels at a time, just the installation of the panels can take 3 to 4 weeks. We use a Nebraska-only recruiting base who places Nebraska residents in our jobs, and then we've had several of those come on and become full-time employees, which has been great. The local economies also benefit because they're going to lock in their price of electricity for the solar projects for 20 to 30 years. So what's happening out there? Today and yesterday's centralized power grid is kind of being broken apart and put back together. There's still the large coal plants or gas turbines out there feeding neighborhoods, feeding the grid, going out to the commercial businesses. But over the last 5 years, it's really been switching to a distributed grid. More clean power, solar, wind, natural gas is coming through, and you're seeing more and more storage. Now, storage I'll talk about at the end. This is utility scale batteries or capacitors that can come online, so when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, they can still provide the power that would mimic those sources of the sun or the wind. Really cool stuff happening right now. If you have questions about that, I know there's been a lot in the news, and we can talk about that at the end. Solar for cities in Nebraska. With our public utility, we're the only 100% public utility in the United States, the only state. So there's very complicated ways of how we could get the utilities involved, make them happy, make sure they benefit as well. And there's 3 ways that have been put together. The first is community solar, and as I go on and talk about each of these individual projects, I'll explain more about them. This is essentially where you can elect to buy your energy from a solar farm. Currently, you may pay a little more, but you lock in that rate for as long as you're in the program. So if you live in the same city for 20 years, in 15 years from now, you'll still be paying $2018 or the 2018 price for your electricity, and that's going to work very well. The second is utility solar. This is where a municipality with their own utility or one of the larger utilities like NPPD or Grand Island or OPPD, they elect to just build a large solar farm and have it inject right into their grid. So this is usually tied directly to a substation and then is monitored by both us and the utilities. Talk a little bit about that too. And last is really a brand new thing, and it's kind of unique to Nebraska. Aurora is the first one to do this. This is a behind-the-meter solar. This was developed, this program was developed for the wastewater treatment plant in Aurora, and we'll go into depth on it. It's kind of a new thing, but you're going to see a lot more of these popping up in Nebraska. What types of solar are out there? Off-grid, that's where if you've got a hunting cabin or even your home these days and you want to go off-grid, you can put solar in with a battery or a natural gas generator. Grid interactive is the up-and-comer. This is where you're going to be connected to the grid but also have a battery in your home to offset your peak loads or just provide power overnight. It's going to work very quickly, and we can talk about that. The batteries are dropping in price like crazy. Everybody's heard about the Tesla Powerwalls, and I can talk about those as well. Today, though, the focus is going to be grid-tied. All these community solar projects are grid-tied, meaning they feed directly to the grid in some form or another. And they're also utility scale. Anything over 100 kilowatts in Nebraska is considered utility scale, which is kind of low. A lot of states started out at 500 kilowatts or even 1 megawatt. Grid-tied is the most common type of solar system in America right now. 95%, probably even a little more than that. The least expensive. They don't have the ability to store the energy As the energy is produced, it's either used at the closest load or it goes back out to the grid where it's accounted for. Nearly every every solar system in Nebraska currently is grid tied in some form. So any energy that's not consumed at the site will go back out on the grid. And we have 168 power districts at last count. And so each one of those is different in their rules and how they will offset your usage or repay you for it. We're shooting for standardized legislation on that right now in the unicameral. But each project is different, and the way these utilities interact can really affect on how the project's set up. Other states don't worry about this. They normally have 2 or 3 privately owned power utilities, which are kind of federally regulated, and it's a lot easier to deal with them because they have to do it. Not that our utilities haven't really jumped on board in the last 2 years. It's been great. These types of system works best when there is a constant load or it's a utility application. This is just because that energy needs to be used, and the sooner it can be used without traveling across lines or anything, the better. So a daytime load, a wastewater treatment plant, a community swimming pool, all kinds of stuff work great for the grid side. Last but not least on this slide is the economies of scale. When you're installing your own personal solar on a rooftop for your business or in the yard on the farm, you're just buying 25 kilowatts at a time. That's the max you can do in Nebraska by law. However, when you go from a 25 kilowatt to 100 kilowatt, the economies of scale literally cut the price nearly in half. And when you go from 100 kilowatts to a megawatt, now you're down to a third. Simply put, the larger the farm, the more we can go out and install in one time, the smaller the cost per watt. So there's a great advantage to these communities. Rather than doing a bunch of small ones, get it all built and all put out at one time. Also, these are all built to be expandable. So a community likes to get its foot with 500 kilowatts or a megawatt, and then they plan phase 2 immediately, and we just come back and can expand these very easily. Municipal solar is rapidly growing in the towns and communities, small to large across Nebraska. We were very surprised 2 years ago when we started noticing the interest was coming from the west to the east. Lincoln and Omaha were kind of slow on the uptake. Omaha's still not where they need to be. It was the smaller towns and cities coming to us, and completely opposite of what we expected to happen in Nebraska when solar finally hit. But we've got some cool projects I'll talk about in just a minute. It's really good to offset a large load. And in small communities, that's normally the wastewater treatment facility. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, hopefully 365 days a year, because that's something they don't want to go down. And so that's normally one of their biggest expenditures for the electrical budget. Other large loads can be schools, can be community swimming pools, can be roadwork buildings where they store equipment and work on equipment. And now we are having municipalities set their own sustainability goals, which a lot of other states have set, but since we didn't have a state-based power plan, these communities are developing them on their own. Fremont has, Lexington has, quite a few others have already got their own goals they want to meet. This year, a group came together and released the new Husker Power Plan, which is their recommendations for the state. It looks pretty good. I haven't had a chance to see the final goal or the final plan, but it just came out yesterday or the day before, and that information should be online by now. It's going to be a good thing for Nebraska. The other thing is if it's two smaller communities, we can leverage, if they're close to each other, we can finance both those projects together. So there's your economies of scale. If we built a megawatt in Hastings and maybe a megawatt in nearby Donovan, we could bundle those two together, construct them at the same time, and then receive those economies of scale benefits for two projects instead of one. So now we're getting to the picture part. Central City was the very first community solar system in Nebraska. It was developed by a guy named Cliff Mesner and Chris Anderson, the city administrator there. They wanted to put some solar up. They were going to do it, weren't sure where to do it, and they had some land left over at their industrial park. And so they gauged the interest of the community. It was very large. So they decided to build a 250 kilowatt system for their first phase. And that was 3.5 years ago. That was the first one. This picture is of phase 2, and I'll talk about that in a moment. This is what we added last summer, another 500 kilowatts. Here's some drone footage of Central City. You're seeing the tracked array. That's what we installed this summer. Those rows run north to south, and in the morning they face the east, and then they track the sun throughout the day. So this is late in the evening where they're all facing west. That's 500 kilowatts on the tracker system. Now you're seeing the old system, 250 kilowatts of fixed mount, where it faces south, doesn't rotate or anything, and just continually faces south to catch the sun. Now, that's the oldest one. The old fixed mount is 250 kilowatts. It's almost 4 years old. The cost of that is almost equal to what we did this last summer for the 500 kilowatt system on a tracking system. Now that's double the size, but also when you use the tracker following the sun, you gain another 25 to 30% of output just because the panels are constantly pointed at the sun. That gives you an idea of why it started making economic sense in Nebraska about 2 years ago. They just couldn't argue with it anymore. And prices have leveled out. If we've got any questions about where pricing is now, I can get to those as well. So shortly after that happened in Central City, NPPD decided to come up with a program of their own for community solar to service their customers, which there's hundreds of retail and wholesale towns customers that buy from NPPD. So they came up with Sunwise. And in this program, as a resident or a business in a town that's participating, you can elect to buy or to offset up to 80% of your electric bill by buying it from a solar farm. Now, currently, they allow you to buy it in 150 kilowatt hour chunks. So if you need 4 chunks, you would then see that price on your electric bill along with the other 20% that you're purchasing from the old systems, the coal or the gas or whatever it is. But your 80% is locked in at that rate when you signed up. And if you live in the same community, or even if you move within the community's limits, you can take that, you can take your membership with you. It transfers very easily. The billing's very easily. Some towns that you pay a little bit extra for the solar energy right now. Some are right on par. None of them are less than yet. But within 5 years, when you're locked in at that price, you're going to be very happy you signed up. And after 10 years, even if we just look at 3% inflation affecting the electric grid with no other influences, you're going to be very happy. And with the lifespan of 25 to 30 years modeled for all these systems, it will definitely benefit you in the long run for any of these areas. Currently, there's 258 kilowatts installed throughout the state, which isn't much, but the next one's going to be, I believe, 2 or 3 megawatts, so it's going to be 10 times this size in very short order. The first one we partnered with on NPPD when we were developing this was in Scottsbluff. And here's where I was talking about, we started way out west rather than the eastern part of the state where all the people are. Partnered with NPPD, and it's actually located right in their front office. They don't deny that they did it for PR. It's very small. It's only 128 kilowatts, which is about enough to power 10 or so homes. So we were limited on size. They wanted to have it next to the office, and they wanted to do a ground mount. And that was a fixed ground mount, and they had their reasons for that. Some of it was the trackers wouldn't fit very well. So Scottsbluff put it out on the radio, and it sold out in 3 days. The interest was so great. Before I got to the conference 2 years ago to announce it, I was told I couldn't announce it because it was sold out. And now that has generated an RFP, a request for proposals in Scottsbluff, that is for 5 megawatts. That can service between 1,100 and 1,200 homes throughout the Scottsbluff Gehring vicinity, and the interest has been overwhelming, to say the least. It's been very, very positive there. The second one, this is kind of a cool story, and it really relates to Nebraska because it's ag-related. I've lived in Nebraska my whole life. I had no idea where Venango was. It's about a mile from the Colorado border. This was our second Sunwise project with NPPD. Also very small, less than 100 kilowatts. The reason being, the infrastructure in the town of 100 people couldn't handle any more of that on their system. But Venango wanted to have something because they had a new ag company coming to town, and they only wanted to come if there was a renewable energy option. So this was put up, the company came to town, agreed to buy all the energy from that and wanted much more. So we'll be seeing shortly some infrastructure upgrades in Venango. It's going to benefit the community with jobs. It's going to benefit the utility because they now have a new customer and need the new infrastructure. And really, overall, the city kind of got put on the map. This made some big agricultural publications throughout the United States, and it was pretty cool to see. So little town in Nebraska kind of kicked everything off. While we were doing those two, I was working in Lexington, and while we were building this was completed last May, almost 4 megawatts. This was the largest one in the state at the time. Lincoln was also building theirs, and we're comparable in size with Lincoln, but we like to say we're just a little bit bigger. This took 18 months to construct, 12,000 panels. We drove 1,978 piles into the ground to hold it. It's 4 megawatts, and each one of those megawatts takes up about 5 acres, so that's 19 acres of ground out there in Lexington. Lexington decided they wanted the whole community benefit, so this was what was called a PPA, a power purchase agreement. And with these agreements, the city said, we just want to offset some of our electrical use. We don't want to own it, we don't want to maintain it, we don't want to know anything about it, but we will agree to buy all the power from you for 25 years if you can meet this price per kilowatt hour. Well, through financial agreements and a lot of math, we were able to finally meet their target. It was a very robust target. So for 4 megawatts of Lexington's load, which is about 10% of their entire load, they are now locked in at this price for 25 years. There's no escalator on that. So it is literally going to be the same price 2017 for the next 25 years. One of my favorite projects and our biggest to date. Gothenburg is just right up the road from Lexington. They kind of benefited, as I mentioned. We didn't bundle them financially, but since we were in the neighborhood, we were able to go right over there, finish Lexington, go right to Gothenburg. It's a 500 kilowatt system feeding directly to the town. The town decided they wanted to own this, and they got a grant for half the project from an environmental trust. And then they did a small city bond to pay for the rest of it. The land it's on was all but useless. It had a railroad spur running to that old elevator you can see south of the system. So they actually pulled that out, and now we are looking to expand this system to 2 megawatts next fall. Really happy with the response in Gothenburg too. Fremont. This is kind of a really cool case here in Nebraska, as it's the first one that we know of in the United States. SEPA came out and did a nationwide case study on this project, and we've got a lot of national press. And what happened is Fremont city manager decided he wanted to do solar, and he wanted to gauge the interest. So he ran some radio ads. He went on a couple local radio talk shows. He asked me to come present at a home show a little over a year and a half ago. And him and I ended up being so overwhelmed with response, we planned on giving the presentation 5 times that day, and we ended up giving it 13 times. So we got done with that, and we decided we better do at least 1 megawatt, and he agreed. So he went out and started really asking people what they would pay. Do they want to buy shares? How much electricity would they like to offset? And they all hovered right around. They'd all like to offset 90 to 100%, but everybody agreed that 80% was good. And we approached residents and small businesses first. And we kept getting the question, well, can I take advantage of the 30% federal tax credit when I just buy the shares? And the answer to that is no. And that's the federal tax credit. If you put a solar system in for your business or personally, you get 30% tax credit back off the entire cost of the system. So if your system was $30,000, just for ease of math, you could take $10,000 right off the top when you're figuring your ROI. So we said, we can't do that selling shares. What if we literally sold panels? What if we kept track of the serial numbers, which we do anyway, and allowed people and businesses to buy the panels out there? We cover all the maintenance. We cover all the insurance. Those would be built into the cost of the panels. I wonder what the response to that would be. In our best estimate, we figured that would be 25%. It ended up being 50-50, maybe even 55 to 45 people purchasing the panels. And haven't even approached the larger businesses, hadn't even approached the larger businesses in town yet. So the 1 megawatt sold out in 5 weeks, 50-50 shares versus panel owned. He's like, we got to add more. And at that site, only thing else we could squeeze in was another half a megawatt or so. Filled that up, it sold out in 2 weeks. We now have a 70-person waiting list for phase 2, which will occur this summer. And we still haven't approached the major businesses in town, but they're approaching us. So Fremont has really developed something really cool. I'm glad it happened here in Nebraska. The model is now being adapted all over the United States. So that panel buying or the share owning, this is the first time it's ever been combined, and it was thanks to the community of Fremont. As you can see, something cool on that picture, their coal-fired plants right in the background. I like that. They say it's clean. This is one I really want to delve into because I think this is going to be the most rapid growth in community solar. This is for the City of Aurora wastewater treatment facility. This is that behind the meter I talked about. The city manager and the mayor had gone to a conference probably 3 years ago now. And rather than even thinking about community solar, the city manager had a background in wastewater treatment. And he knew the bills out there, and he knew it was a constant load, and he knew how much they could save using the solar. So he approached us, Rick Melcher and then Mayor Dave Long. They just said, we'd like to offset this. Is this even possible? Well, they're an NPPD retail customer, meaning that Aurora doesn't have their own utility. They just buy electricity from NPPD. So NPPD had to get involved, and we developed what's called a new buy-sell rider. And this one took a while. It started in November of 15. It took almost 2 years to get notice to proceed. But once we did, we were able to construct that project. That includes order times for the equipment. We actually constructed that project in about 5 weeks in conjunction with Central City Phase 2. But with this buy-sell agreement in NPPD, the City of Aurora still pays their normal electric bill that they were paying before the project, but there's also a production meter out there. And at the end of every year, NPPD cuts them a check for their production. Now, that's never happened really before in Nebraska because NPPD agreed to pay the retail rates for summer and winter. It was actually a negotiated rate that was slightly different. It's very difficult with the rate structures to say, but it ended up being very favorable for the community. The return of investment ended up being 7 years. And now this is a 30-year lifespan on this system. And so with that 7-year return of investment, the city said, we'd like to just do a municipal lease on this and own it. And 2 years ago, would that have worked? No. You would have had to have an outside investor who could take advantage of the tax credit, the 30%, because the municipality can't get that. But the pricing was such last summer that we were able to do a 7-year municipal lease. They had some extra money coming in from improvements they've made to the treatment plant. They're going to pay that off in 3 years, and their staff is going to be trained. They will own the system outright in 3 years and enjoy at least 22 years of production from the system. For all the math guys and finance guys and gals out there, 7% internal rate of return, which is great, 47% simple ROI for the city. $500,000 I say there, projected cash savings, is very conservative. We expect this to offset at least 95% of that usage at that plant every year for the next 25 years. Very conservative. I would guess it's closer to 800,000 to $1 million. I put the slide up here too. This is the layout. This is some of our software that we use. We talked about that tracking system in Central City. You got to see the picture earlier. You can see the north-south rows running there over in the blue. There's 2 blocks of those, and each block has a motor. So there's only 2 motors out there driving each of these blocks. And then each of the north-south rows are connected via a drive shaft. Each row has its own sealed gearbox. It has a 30-year warranty. They all move in conjunction. The motor is also a sealed motor. It has a 30-year warranty. This type of tracking system, I just want to point out, has very few moving parts, and it's designed to be in our environment. A lot of tracking systems out there were designed for the deserts of Arizona and California. Didn't need to handle the winds, didn't need to handle the cold, the snow, everything else. This has the fewest moving parts, and in our environment, that can really add up to savings with maintenance. There really is no maintenance on these. If a gearbox dies, we replace it. If a motor dies, we replace it. And that's under warranty for 25 to 30 years, depending on which component it is. I'm just going to walk through the equipment that's out there at Aurora, and this is kind of representative of all the projects I've talked about so far. 2 main classes of panel right now, monocrystalline and poly. I won't get into the big differences, other than solar panels are now a commodity, like corn, oil, soybeans. The pricing on these 2 varies up and down depending on what's available. All of our projects are utility grade monocrystalline. There have been some more advances in poly, and we'll see more of that coming up. And then also you'll still hear about thin film. If there's questions about thin film at the end, I can answer those. But out at Aurora, we've got monocrystalline panels. At every project, actually, we have monocrystalline panels. And they're normally around 300 to 350 watt panels. Our 350 watts just became available on the market just in the last couple months. 3 main types of inverters. The inverter is what converts the DC from the solar power, which the photon hits the solar panel and knocks an electron loose, and they all flow in direct current until they reach the inverter. String inverters allow you to attach multiple rows of panels together to make your voltages and your design work. Microinverters are the newer technology in that every panel has an inverter right on the back of it. So if shading is an issue, or cloud cover, or if you're in a worse environment in Nebraska, you can use these microinverters. Each panel then has a tiny inverter on the back of it, so it's putting out 60 hertz AC from the panel, can go directly to the grid. Normally it's all gathered into a little monitoring system, but yeah, that works very good. Utilities like this because they know exactly what's coming out of that panel. There's no DC link that still kind of scares them, or they don't like dealing with. The last is power optimizers, and these are basically just small computer boxes that can kind of regulate how the panels interact with each other in the strings or with the microinverters. They're coming quickly. The intelligence of these systems is growing by leaps and bounds. String inverters, that's everything we use out there. We do microinverters on home and businesses, but normally these large communities are all inverters, or string inverters. And they range anywhere in size from 30 kilowatts to 60 kilowatts. Well, on a 500 kilowatt system, that ends up to be 9 or 10 60 kilowatt inverters. Now that kind of goes against my thing earlier saying keep it simple, keep the fewer moving parts. Well, the inverters have no moving parts other than their fans to cool them. What this allows is, in the older times, which I mean like in the 2000s, a 500 kilowatt system may have had just 1 or 2 giant inverters that weren't as efficient as these. These also offer some redundancy. If you lose a 60 kilowatt inverter on a 500 kilowatt system, that's 1/10 your system. You can go out and fix it and still enjoy, 90% of your output. So that's why there's multiple inverters out there now. How does it work? The PV arrays out there on the tracker are fixed to the roof. It goes through that inverter, converts it from DC to AC. When I started 10 years ago, the inverters were around, the best ones were 88% efficient. The ones we use for the community projects now are between 93 and 97% efficient. There's a lot of reduction in loss in the last few years with the inverters. They've come a long way. Comes out through the meter there on the home or the production meter. If there's a load going on at the home or the community, it feeds that load first. If there's nothing there it needs to satisfy, it goes out to the grid and is once again monitored by the utility and by us to make sure we know how much is coming and going out of that system at all times. Apologize for this slide, it's kind of hard to see in Aurora. To the right, you can make it out. There's the rows north and south of the panels, how it comes together into the inverter racks. It is then fed directly into the buildings for the treatment center. And anything that's left then comes out and goes up to the new pole and transformer and back out to the grid. I got some pictures of that. So the sun starts out there. This was a pretty cloudy day. I took this picture. Shining out there, hits the panels. They are gathered up in what's called the strings. The strings then feed to their inverter. This is a 60 kilowatt sun-grow inverter that's 95% efficient. It's converted into from the DC to the AC. It is then collected at the bottom of the inverter bank. So there's 4 inverters there. There's 2 banks of those in Aurora. At the end, you can see the safety disconnect box and where it all comes together into a larger AC wire that's trenched underground. It's trenched over to the building where we brought it up out of the ground here, and it goes back over that door back down there, as you can see. And we actually had to remove a pole, an old pole that was in our way, to get to the city's existing junction box. We really didn't have to add any infrastructure other than that conduit to feed into the treatment plant, which really saved a lot of cost. This is when we were putting it all together. So there's the new transformer. That's the thing that steps up the electricity so it can feed the grid directly when it goes out to the grid. We worked in conjunction on its design with NPPD and our own electrical engineers. And then laying on the ground here before they were installed are the 3 safety boxes, 2 manual disconnects there, and the bottom one is an automatic disconnect. Now, these systems aren't allowed by law to run if they don't sense grid power. So if the grid goes down, these systems all go down. But also NPPD and other utilities require these 2 manual disconnects and then another auto disconnect on top of that, just for safety reasons. There's our brand new pole that feeds straight out to the electrical grid, and in the other direction goes right into the wastewater treatment facility. So it's working out very well. It's performing well over model, meaning which we model for Nebraska weather, the output for every day of the year, every second of every hour. And we have really good data from 40 to 50 years of UNL collected data that really makes the models very, very accurate. Here's another shot of Aurora. My panorama kind of got screwed up there. This is, I had put them in the storm position. We have 2 storm positions. One is flat for when there's high winds. They just go flat. They can withstand up to 180 mile an hour hurricane winds. And we have some of these down in the Turks Caicos, which have just survived the hurricane last summer. There's another stow position, and these can be connected directly to the weather service. So if there's a high wind warning or thunderstorm warning for Aurora, and we know the wind and possibly the hail are coming out of the west, which they normally do, or the north, the system can automatically turn itself to the east to protect itself. Now, these are utility scale panels, meaning they're quite a bit bigger and more robust than what you'll see on someone's house usually, although we use utility panels on everything. They have to take a 1-inch steel ball bearing at 60 miles an hour at a 90-degree angle in both the center and the edge without being damaged. That's required by the utilities and also the military. We've had 2,000 panels out around Sturgis, South Dakota for the last 5 years. And in three years ago, I believe, they had a record-setting hailstorm during the bike rally up there that destroyed a lot of motorcycles. We lost 2 out of 2,000 panels, and it was mainly cosmetic. They were slightly cracked. They still worked. But we also had a campground up there where one of our friends had half of his roof on his RV covered with these, and the other half not. The hail went right through the roof of his RV where it wasn't covered and didn't damage the solar panels at all. So that's kind of one of my favorite stories. And currently, with these newer panels, when we put them on a roof, my guys can walk on top of them while they're working, when they're fixed mount. Here's an output, and each of these cities will have their websites up. You can keep checking. I think Aurora might be up now. Central City's definitely up. You can find their website and see what the output is every day, all the time. I wanted to put this up because can you see December 24th through the 29th? There's no production. No solar production occurred at any farm. All of ours, including Kearney, there was no production. And this was due to the weirdest snow and ice storm that we've ever experienced in the solar world in Nebraska. When it first misted and became ice, kind of melted, became crunchy, and then the snow fell on top of that, it became like concrete. So from Scottsbluff to Central City, we were losing production at quite a large rate. You can see there was zero production for those 5 days. What could we do about this? There's not really anything we could do. Luckily, in our modeling, knowing Nebraska, we know weird things are going to happen. We're super conservative, and this 5 days won't affect the overall for the year. It won't even be a noticeable blip on the production. Other than that, the system's performing as designed, if not a little better, and the wastewater treatment plant's been performing perfectly. Just a touch on how they're financing these. If you're a wholesale company, meaning you're a NPPD client or town, but you have your own utility that you manage, you can do a direct PPA, power purchase agreement, with an outside entity, us or someone else. You can do that municipal lease I talked about, works well. Traditional public financing is finally coming in as well. That means a local bank might be interested, a local credit union, anything that might be considered an old school financing option will work. For the retail customers where you buy your electricity from NPPD or OPPD, it's a little different. You have to use their Sunwise program if you want to do a large scale solar system. You have to do a municipal lease or finance it themselves if it's behind the meter like Aurora. And then some of the banks are starting to work directly with NPPD to do more traditional loans and other things for it. Really changed. That's all just changed in the last year. And I added this slide at the end. This is the #1 question I get now. What's going on with the batteries? We've been a Tesla Powerwall dealer for 2 years. We never got a single Powerwall 1, and we've yet to see our first Powerwall 2. If you want a Powerwall, you can order it from Tesla, and it will show up, and we can install it, but they haven't started distributing them on the wide scale through their distributors and like us. So they are coming. They're a lithium ion. We have a ton of flooded lead acid batteries, which are essentially large marine batteries, because we have a lot of off-grid cabins in western Nebraska and the Black Hills. There's some maintenance. You got to keep them watered. You got to keep, vent them, make sure you keep an eye on them. But they work very well. Their lifespan and their charge cycle isn't as good as a lithium ion, but they're cheap, way cheaper than lithium ion. The glass mats, they've sealed battery, less maintenance, still don't have the charge-recharge cycle ability of the lithium ions or the lithium polymers, but also mid-price point. They work very well. If you want to take a vacation home off the grid or something like that, you sure can. The lithium ions. This is where everything's at right now. We are running half of our shop, and we have about 20 people working in there at all times. We also have a warehouse that's open 24 hours. We have 15 kilowatts of solar charging a 10 or 15 kilowatt battery, and that battery then overnight runs that whole half of the office. We have 2 meters there, so it essentially runs its own meter. It's been great. In fact, we a lot of times have extra energy to sell back to the utility, but South Dakota doesn't have any net metering, so it doesn't do us any really good. The utility scale batteries are coming. You may have just heard on the news that in Colorado, wind plus storage is now on parity with a new coal plant. So rather than building a coal plant, they can put up a wind turbine or a wind farm, combine it with megawatt batteries. And so when the wind's not blowing, they'll lead out the electricity from those batteries, and it will just be a stable source of energy rather than incremental. Same way with the solar. At night, you charge up that battery during the day and release it at night. It's a constant load source or a constant feed for utilities, making things a lot easier. That's it. I thought I'd talk about the tariff. Everybody's heard about the 30% tariff on the solar panels. Is it the end of days? Is solar going to die? We've actually known about it for 8 months. We sent our owners to lobby last fall to the Trade Commission. We were very nervous up until about December with the proposed 60% or higher tariffs. But when it was announced that it was 30, that's acceptable. Panels account for about 40% of the cost of any project. Now, if the panel itself goes up 30%, that's only going to raise your entire system cost about 10. And also, last summer when I mentioned the favorable pricing for Aurora and Central City, those panels were bought for about 20% less than what they're currently at. So the market forces have already driven it down almost an extra 30% last summer. And with demand doing nothing but rising, I think the tariff isn't going to be as big a black eye on solar world as we thought it was. I think the community stuff's definitely going to survive. The residential stuff might slow down just because they don't get the economies of scale. But that's it, and I'll take questions from here in the room first, if there's any. Yes, sir.
You talked earlier about how you move power over the rule.
It all depends on the voltage of the lines that you're feeding to, whether it's a 13.5 or the big 115, and how close and how the substations are set up. So there are 2 substations that actually Lexington feeds into. So when we split that, they were both about equidistant from each other. We'd have to ask my electrical engineers what they figured for that, but yeah, it's the closer the better. One great thing about Lexington is the beef packing plant is just a quarter mile away. They have a 7 megawatt cooling room. So 4 megawatts, all of our electricity isn't going very far. It's going right to offset that cooling room.
Can you talk a little bit about thin films that you're talking about?
I can. Thin films are coming a long way. They've always kind of been my favorites just because they look really nice. If you ever see a solar panel that just looks like a tinted skylight or a tinted window, we actually do this in building integrated PV, where it can look like a window, but it's actually a glass facade of solar panels, and those could be hung vertically. Thin film, there's a lot of research going on. There was a large company called Pramac, an Italian company, and they actually were producing wind turbines for a time in Kearney. They have some thin film technologies that's really taking over Europe right now. And I think you're going to start seeing more and more thin film, especially in architectural design, where it looks a lot better than seeing the soles. It's just a solid glass surface. Still more expensive, a good 20 to 30% premium over a poly or a mono.
Same output, same.
They can, yes. So the thin films, last I checked, were leveled out around 280 to 300 watts, whereas the poly and mono are up to 350 now, reasonably priced. Unfortunately, the worldwide manufacturing is so driven to poly and mono that it'll be quite a while before you see a shift over to the thin films.
If you're a socially responsible company or college and you want to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, so for the community solar projects, do those renewable energy credits go to NPPD, or can the college or company get those?
Believe it or not, this is still a gray area, and I have accountants that argue with us both ways. We believe that the community should get some. Now, if it's like Lexington where it's a power purchase agreement, no, those all go to the financer. They get to keep the renewable energy credits, I believe. They were retained in Lexington by the finance company and GenPro. But for the community stuff, we're not sure how that's going to flesh out in Fremont, where you could buy the panels or buy the energy. So since Fremont owns the whole thing, but they're selling panels, they may not get all the RECs. And the RECs here in Nebraska haven't been worth really anything yet, but definitely it's up and coming. We're going to see more of it, especially with the new Husker power plant, I think.
I've never heard of an absorbed glass battery before.
They're kind of high output car batteries and motorcycle batteries, so they're sealed and there's no maintenance. They just have a much greater charge, recharge count than what the old lead acids do. I'm afraid it's a bit out of my expertise on them, but they're usually lighter weight and smaller in footprint as well.
We can open it
Okay.
Yeah.
Olivia, I think we're ready to open up for questions.
Okay, I don't have any online yet, but so if anybody has any questions for Jeff from the online side of things, you can drop them in the chat box to me and I will read them to him. Or if you're in a live viewing room, you can give them to your room host. And you can also do it through Twitter using the hashtag SLPS Thursday. And then I will read them to Jeff. So if there are any other ones in person, we can go through those and maybe somebody will have a question through the chat box in a little bit.
So you mentioned that you're getting a lot of employees from the state of Nebraska. Do you have specific colleges, training programs that you get those employees out of, or are they more doing installing, not so much project management?
Most of them were younger people, I'd say 24 to 30, average age probably. They had interest in electricity. They had interest in solar, and actually several of them contacted the recruiter when they found out that's what we were doing. So the interest is there, and the ones that have come on board full-time really gained an interest in becoming a electrician with their apprenticeship and journeyman. We would like to develop and would work with the community colleges or other colleges a training program to get us the guys we need out there with the DC skills. There's a lot of, old school AC electricians around, but even the guys building houses and building commercial buildings, they're kind of scared of that DC stuff. And so if you can learn the DC from the ground up, excellent, excellent.
Jeff, you mentioned NAPSEP.
Yep.
And why is that so difficult to get recognized by?
80% of the master and contractor electricians that pass it, the top tier or that take it, fail. Our owner was able to pass it on his first try, and until 2015, he was the only one in South Dakota and Nebraska. We have since got another one in Nebraska. He's actually a college student or a college professor in Omaha, and we gained another electrical contractor in South Dakota that picked theirs up as well. When we work with Ellsworth Air Force Base, that is a straight up requirement to be able to work with the military.
I was just going to ask, so that is a requirement.
Yep.
Of the military.
Yep.
And basically just give you a better rep.
Federal government as well. So if you're working with the state parks or the big federal parks, we do a lot of stuff with Custer Park up there in South Dakota as well. Tough test. I'm afraid to take it.
What about you running into what do we need to know about dealing with planning, or is that better for you?
So yeah, that's a great question. I didn't touch on that. Some of the communities we talk to are now getting 2 or 3 solar put up on roofs in town, on businesses, raises all kinds of zoning questions. Everything else, the neighbor doesn't like it. The neighbor thinks it's going to reflect and blind their cat or something crazy. Ground-based as well. They're worried kids are going to go out there and get electrocuted and things like that. So a couple of the cities we've worked with approached us because they don't want to deal with that. They'd rather have one big one out there that they control or involved with rather than having, 10, 15 panels spread all over town and all over different roofs. It hasn't been a problem in Nebraska yet because there's only 3 or 4 qualified installers doing residential, including us. We still do it. But I worked for quite a time in Arizona, and the fly-by-night guys that would come in and do horrible installs. We even see that in South Dakota now, where we have a whole team. That's all they do is go fix badly installed residential commercial solar in South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Colorado. There's a lot of, used to be a lot of snake oil sold where promises were made that could not be kept, and then also a lot of shoddy installs. So zoning was very big for us. Had to deal with that in Holdridge, dealt with it in Grand Island, kind of dealt with it here in Hastings. We had a doctor here in town that put up too many wind turbines, and he kind of fought some of that, but he's going to add solar now to his turbines. It just takes that out of the equation, keeps the whole community happy. The not in my backyard, the NIMBY for the wind was always bad, but some of the crazy stuff people come up for solar, it's just as bad. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I used to go to a lot of zoning meetings.
The negative.
Yes.
Yeah. Like the vibrations of microbes not being in the soil.
Yep. Yep.
And all of that is unproven.
The only environmental impact that we've had with our solar when we've had to work with the EPA on most of these, we didn't realize that Lexington was in the Canadian geese migratory path. So we had a stripe of white going across our solar panels because they like to alleviate themselves over the panels for some reason. So that's the only system we've ever had to go out and clean. And it was amazing how concentrated the line was across the system. But it washed off mostly in the rain, and we went out there and just hit it. We hit it with a normal pressure washer.
So how is the industry that you're representing balancing with the common sense that might be with the population to hopefully influence things in a standardized way, both from the environmental impact standpoint as well as the zoning stuff that can just be different from location to location?
Yes. The standardization for the interconnection is what we're fighting for with those 162 different 168 power districts and utilities. We would just like to see a standard interconnection agreement. Yeah. The only one in the United States like that. The zoning as well, since most of these projects are within the city and on city-owned ground, we haven't faced really anything on these bigger ones. But I would love to see the standardized interconnect. I would love to see more legislation, I guess, to simplify the whole process. To say if you want to do solar, you meet these requirements. That's all you have to do. It's pretty simple up to 25 kilowatts with LD 436 net metering law from 2009, but I'd like to see that raised. Dawson Public Power, which services 9 counties, has raised theirs to 100 kilowatts for farms and 200 kilowatts for commercial. Lincoln Electric has allowed several 100 kilowatt systems on businesses in Lincoln. So they're coming around. It's just still a fight. Omaha OPPD is so far behind the curve that they haven't even released their community plan. And we submitted a proposal to them last October, as did 10 other companies, about what we thought should happen, and we've yet to have a response on it. There was a woman wrote into the Omaha World Herald just this week or last week, pretty scathing remarks about how Omaha had missed out now that the 30% tariff is in effect, because they had projects on the drawing board since last October that they could have brought online or brought to fruition. But they're changing. I go to Nebraska Solar for meetings in Omaha. In fact, there's one tonight. For the first time in 3 years that I've been attending, OPPD sent a rep last month and promised to simplify things. Their average time for getting something hooked up in OPPD now is 9 months. They promised to get that down to 5 days. I don't know if that's going to happen, but pretty well. And just to have a representative there, and he also said that their community solar plan would be in place second quarter. So they're catching up. But the standardization over those utilities would be excellent, to say the least.
Why is it the South Dakota doesn't do that? How do you deal with that? It applies to our situation. Is that a morbid curiosity?
So I've been in this business 10 years. It's a long, long time. I was even working my solar business when I was back here at school. South Dakota has had a lot of trouble with corruption in their state government over the years, and hopefully don't have any government officials from South Dakota on, but they have never even considered net metering due to the number of rural co-ops they have, and also Black Hills Energy is highly against it, that serves a lot of the state. So GenPro's 13 years old, and up there, they got their start in solar water pumping, replacing windmills. We've got thousands of wells throughout Nebraska, South Dakota, and we've got a couple hundred dealers now across the United States. That gave us the kind of the war chest to fight against South Dakota and even Nebraska back in the day before net metering passed. So we just push, and now South Dakota, these businesses especially, are saying, we don't care. You get us as close to zero, and if we make a little extra in the summer and not quite enough in the winter, we want to do it anyway. So in the summer, if they're pushing it out to the grid and not getting paid anything, they just literally don't care anymore. That we just size them as close to zero as we can. Then it gets very convoluted with the co-ops up there, and also with Black Hills Energy can really stand in our way.
So what's the difference between the co-ops up there and our REAs for 168?
So we are usually a power district, which is a little different than a co-op. The co-ops have membership, so communities buy into their local region. You don't have a choice which district you're in. It's based on your location. So that's the main difference. Co-ops have really come on board lately. They fought it quite a while as well. I will mention the new tax code. One benefit that no one was aware of when it passed is, and surprised me, if you were a business and you were able to take the depreciation on this equipment, if you had the tax burden, you could depreciate 50% of this in the first year. So if you had a $100,000 system, you could depreciate 50%, and then the rest of it is on the accelerated schedule over the next 4 or 5 years. With the new tax code, you can depreciate 100% of the system first year. So now the businesses have started calling, the ones that, and we haven't even really publicized that yet, that we figured that out. The ones who are figuring that out are now realizing this is just another piece of equipment we buy. If we can take that off our tax burden, why wouldn't we reduce our electric bill, pay for the system on our tax burden, and go? So I think that's going to be a big driving force that's going to help offset that tariff too.
That would be just on these positions. It might be on a different kind of depreciation schedule because they're would not apply.
Correct. They will not be grandfathered back in. Yep. Anything new or expansions. And we're kind of been looking at that. If it does it have to expand by 10%, 50%, you'd need to double the size of it. We're thinking you probably about have to double the size of it to be considered a new system. But they said expansions can qualify as well. There's no clarification on that yet. But if need be, you can set it up through another 30 amp per acre at your home or business and call it a second system. I mean, I think that would work fine. Another inverter, rather than upgrading your current inverter, just add another inverter. It'll still be behind 1 meter, but I don't know if that would matter or not. I would guess they're going to say it will, but yeah, it's been a fun year.
I know very little, so some of the stuff that I've talked about.
I'm glad you're here. That's what we're here for. This is my favorite part of the job. Community outreach has been large for me. I also work with the communities. I'm the one who first approached them, and then I stay with them till the end and beyond. I still monitor them. I like to monitor solar systems, which I don't know what that says about me, but we monitor them at GenPro. We have a partner, also Energy, to develop the software. They monitor them, and then the cities monitor themselves. So there's 3 eyeballs on that stuff all the time. And if something as little as in Aurora, if we lose efficiency on 2 panels, we'll get notified. If we lose an inverter, we'll get notified. Text messages, emails, everything. So they all have cellular modems out there with them, and they just communicate constantly with the internet. Works good.
Any questions online, Olivia, or no?
No questions online. So
That just means I answered everything.
yeah, you covered it really well. So thank you very much. I learned a lot.
Thank you
and
very
I thought
much
I
for
already
having
knew
me
a
here.
lot. So our next presentation is going to be March 1st, and so that'll be hosted by the Center for Urban Sustainability at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And so that'll be on sustainable leadership presented by Daniel Lossie, who's co-owner of Inverters Group in Omaha. So thank you so much, Jeff, for presenting to us, and I'm sure you'd be happy to answer more questions if people have them in person. But
absolutely.
Unless you get going back to that Omaha meeting. That's tonight.
No, I'm not going to make tonight. I don't have to speak tonight, so I'm taking a month off.
That's okay. Well, thank you
Thanks
very
for having
much.
me.
Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you.